All right, so we have our projects that we're working on, your revolved vessels. This is one of the ones that, of course, has holes through the sides, as well as using the revolve tool in partitions to create these little feet on the bottom. And of course, the drip tray as well. They're on separate bodies, they're separate components. The drip tray, old drippy, does in fact have text coming through on or through emboss. Now, those are the advanced options. The requirement is simply that it needs to have a vessel with holes in the bottom and a tray, both of which were created with the revolve tool. In order to do that stuff, look at the other look at the other video. But I wanted to talk tonight about some of the considerations for how you would go about printing something like this. With our previous projects, it's largely very flat and it kind of just goes right on the build plane. No problem. But with this, there's some considerations, mainly that something like this is going to require supports. And I wanted to talk about ways you can minimize supports, simply because not that it's going to waste a lot of material, but it is wasted material. And if you're printing on your own, well, you're paying for your own material. And if there's a way to not waste as much, yay. So let's go ahead and kick these out of Fusion and get them onto our slicer. So in order to do that, we just go to the object, whichever one it is. Now, you don't need to select the entire component. You can just double click on the object itself, but because these are separate components, you're good. If these were both bodies on the same component, double clicking will sometimes select everything within that component, at least body wise. It's not going to select sketches, stuff like that, but there you go. Oops, not save. So in order to get that out, go to File. Now, again, we're going to 3D print, not to export. Export will save this as a Fusion 360 file, not as an STL. Now, we will discuss the differences between file types later, but for right now, this project, STL is fine. So we're going to 3D print. Your toolbar comes up, and we have, you can select preview mesh if you want. I don't bother. Refinement, high, sure, why not? Now, deselect the send to 3D print utility. You can send this directly to a slicer and it's all set, but I want to discuss some of the options built into the PRUSA Slicer. So we're going to turn that off. Uncheck send to 3D print utility, you're all set. Go to OK. All right, where's this going to go? Somewhere on your computer. Great. I have planter. Done. That's going to save. That's going to kick that out. And it automatically does that. I don't know why Fusion is sometimes when you complete a command, it keeps switching screens. I don't know why it's doing that. Do the same for the drip tray. Double click. 3D print. It's going to save your last selection, meaning you do not have to uncheck send to 3D print utility every time, unless you have closed Fusion and restarting it. Hit OK. Check the name, just in case you need to name anything. Now it's drip tray, so at least there's not just body 1 and body 2. Yes, replace it. I already had it in the file folder. Okay, so now let me hop over to the PRUSA Slicer. Again, I have an outdated version right now. Definitely update. I'm currently on 2.6. It's up to 2.7.1, so definitely update anytime you can. So let me drag and drop over. You can, of course, open up a import model, all that kind of stuff, or you can simply open up on the file and drag and drop. Now, you may not be, depending on how big it is, your project, you may not be able to get both on the same project. And frankly, sometimes that's for the best, because if you are printing something that's much more complex and has multiple parts, yes, of course, the whole point is to be able to load multiple components, multiple objects onto your build plate so you don't have to babysit the whole thing. But if your print fails and you've got a 20-hour print printing 2 different objects, well, if you printed one, it only takes 1 hour, and the other one is a 19-hour print, I'd go ahead and print the 1-hour thing, get it out of the way, and then set up the 19-hour one, just so that way you're not waiting, you're not waiting part of the way through, 10 hours in, and it fails and then ruins both parts. So pick and choose your battles as you want. Now, you cannot, if you want them to be separate, print this as is. Go up to the top, You can either arrange by by hand or select auto arrange, and that's just going to move them around. All right. So outright, we're going to go through problem areas. Now, right now, I could go just use the standard settings, even go to draft quality, make it go faster. Currently, it's selected with PLA, and we'll just leave it as infill 15%. That's fine. Let's hit slice now and see what happens. Now, this will go fairly quickly, but the problem is you're going to have a lot of problems with this outright currently. So right now, well, that's surprising. That is less than 6 hours. That is a 5 hour or 5 hours and 36-minute print. That is frankly kind of impressive. However, warning, detected print stability issue. One of the ones, floating anchors, loose extrusions. What that's meaning is when I orbit under, overhang perimeter all in blue, that's an issue. What that means is the tray more or less will print okay. The vessel will not. It's making minimal contact with the build plate, and that's not really a big problem, just those little feet. But currently, the bottom of that vessel doesn't touch the ground. You can't start a print floating in space. It has to be supported. So that's what this means. That's what these errors mean. So let's go back. Switch back over to plater mode. And for one, let's just try supports from build plate only. Let's see the difference. What's going to happen, it's going to auto-generate supports. These are the scaffolding shapes. Right now, the default setting is these rectangular forms, and I can use the cut-through view and slice down through, and you can get a little bit clearer view of what's being seen. So these supports, obviously, are supporting, at least up top, where that big hole closes, because it needs a little bit of support there. The problem is that's what I was talking about. A little bit of support has to build all this whole thing up. Maybe I can find a way around that. The other thing is, of course, at the bottom. And as I slice down through, it has to build all of that support to create that. So right there, not that big a deal, but it does create a lot more material. Also, note the time change. What was without supports, and it wouldn't have printed that way. It can't print that way. It wouldn't be a successful print, but would have been a 5.5 hour print. Now it's a over 9 hour print because of all that extra stuff. Also, where it's currently oriented, it's giving me an error that it's also outside of the build area. That's why everything is orange in the background. All that means is something went out of bounds. So the auto placement, auto range isn't always the best. All you got to do is go back to plater and just literally move that over a little bit, and it'll be in bounds. So sometimes the auto plater doesn't really put stuff where it needs to be, but that's also because I had originally arranged everything without support selected. So, all right. Well, what can I do to speed this up? What can I do to fix this? Well, a few things. The tray, that's going to be pretty much how it is. That's going to work about how it is. If it's a low tray, something like that, you're kind of stuck where it is. But let's try flipping this cup around. Select the cup, and I'm just going to use the, instead of the rotate, I'm just going to select place on face. And I'm going to flip it just 180, upside down. All right. Probably similar issue, but let's see what comes of it. So now that entire lip is making contact with the build plate, and it's still telling me an issue there, so I just got to move that over. What is outside? Everything. Yes. Oh my God, I think I just killed it. All right, let's move y'all over a little bit. There we go. Try it there. That is just shifting it around a little bit. Should everything be it? Yep, now it's all in bounds. We're good. Okay. Oh, that made it so much worse. so much worse. But one of the major things is outright, it's going to have to print all of that internal. There's ways we can fix this. Speeding it up, meaning, because going from what would be possibly a 5 hour print to 12 hours, that's a little excessive. So let's find ways around that. But one of the main things is this is a much stronger, more stable print with this cup turned upside down because these little feet make such minimal contact with the build plate. It's very likely that the print head, as it's moving back and forth, can knock those off before it ever gets a chance to build together into a one solid bar or one solid piece. So the cup flipped over, that's an excellent solution. All right, so let's see what we can do to reduce some of this. Go back to Plater, and we're going to go to print settings. Now, obviously, we can play with the build plate supports elsewhere, but honestly, right now, I think support on build plate only is probably the best option. Let's go to print settings, and let's go to support material. This is where you can dial back things like the type of supports. Grid is the default. We have snug, and we're going to talk about organic in a moment because that's the one of the new options. Snug is just a different version. I'd leave it at grid for right now. Now, one of the other things you could do is play with the pattern. We have rectilinear grid, honeycomb. Just to show you the difference, what does honeycomb look like? Probably looks like a honeycomb. Even longer. But just show you a different type. So when would you use this? If you had an even more complex shape, because there's more support going through here. The reason it's taking longer is because rather than it being able to print just back and forth in like an arcade style, it's got to make each one of those cells before starting the next one and starting the next one. Just makes more work for it. That's all. But one of the things we can play with is the spacing. So let's go back to print settings, support material. Apparently, let's go back to rectilinear. That made it a lot faster. What we can do is play with the pattern spacing. That the default is we set it to. It says maybe spacing 2.5. Let's bump it up to 5 millimeter spacing. So between each one of those rectilinear lines, let's make 5 millimeters between them instead of 2. Let's see what happens with that. Come on. Okay, so that dropped a fair amount. It's still a lot higher, but it sure isn't 12 hours. So that makes a lot better, and you can see how much more spacing is available there. All right, so that's one of the options. Now that's a pretty standard way of working. These all do remove pretty readily. We can, of course, try out that the other one, what was the rectilinear, and oh, not grid. Let's try snug. Just curious. Let's see what happens with that and this form. Ultimately, this is also a really complex shape because of all the openings and such. If it weren't, we could definitely get away with a lot less support. All right, use the snug setting. It doesn't really need supports in this area, the top of that form, but it definitely needs some supports in the center because not because it's domed, but zooming out, but because it has the drainage holes. If there were not holes on this, it really would probably not need the supports at all. It's just because it has to create those holes there. So, all right, rectilinear snug, that's a pretty effective drop in time. The other one I want to show you is a new addition to a lot of slicers, and it's called organic. So we went to snug, organic. Let's try this one, style, organic. This creates, instead of like a straight up and down scaffolding, this creates trees. So this is kind of based on fractal technology. And it can create really surprising reductions. That just dropped it down to 8 hours. So I just dropped from 10, which was a good drop from 12, but that dropped it to 8 hours. And I want to show you what it's doing here. It makes these tree forms. So rather than having to have all of that grid work there, selecting organic can create, it's not always going to be the solution, but it can create these support trees that are more like a model kit runner rather than an entire like set of scaffolding. If you ever built like plastic model kits, you see all the little runners, all the little plastic bits. Anyway, So organic can be an excellent solution. It's not always going to be the solution. Sometimes, kind of throws a little bit extra stuff at you. Ultimately, one of the other solutions is going to be just change your project a little bit. Sometimes you're going to find things like sharp fillets and things like that might be causing more issue than they're worth. Maybe instead of something that has like a entire floating section underneath, maybe just make it like a little more solid. Or maybe it's because these holes up here on the sides, if these had been straight across, it might have been able to bridge more easily, meaning the printer head could go back and forth a little bit more effectively. These are going to be things you're going to find, and these are they can improve your printing, improve your printing speeds, and things like that. But ultimately, we really just want to find ways to make it finish faster. That's really it, and with the side benefit of obviously using less material. So, all right, using organic supports, and we did change the settings a little bit. Again, pattern spacing is also out to 5. If this were at the original setting of 2, just to show you the variation there. Come on, buddy. All right, that actually didn't change at all. That's all right, but that's relieving. All right, well, now we know that also the pattern spacing on this particular project, it didn't really change that. Now that's all dealing with the cup. Let's zoom in a little bit on the dish. So the text, because it's extruded, or rather it's embossed outward, which is what emboss means, it's going to require more support. The other issue is the reason it's supporting all the way around. Let's go back to the plater. Is because the dish has such a shallow upward curve. Let me hop back over to Fusion and I'll show you the difference there. Main thing here is this heavy curve. It's pretty much a simple arc, but if we were to bring the angle upwards a little bit, just make it a little bit of a sharper incline, it would eliminate a lot of that. The other thing can be, all right, well, this emboss here, maybe it doesn't need to be that far out. Maybe it could be a deboss, which is extruding internal, kind of like that. Or one of the other things you could do is try to, and this isn't always going to be a solution, add fillets, add chamfers to these. Because if you create a transition rather than a harsh outward projection, you can eliminate some of the need for supports. And again, one of the main things with that is it just speeds up your print and can potentially make it stronger. So just out of curiosity, let's have a look at this and see what happens if it'll let me, because with text, fillet and chamfer don't really like to work that often. But let's see what happens when I apply a fillet all the way around. That's going to do all the things, so I doubt this will work. Yeah, error code all around. All right. Ultimately, with something like this, you're probably going to have to, with a fillet. Come on, buddy. I think I just confused the computer. There we go. You're probably going to have to go around and select edges individually, so this gets pretty tedious. I'm not going to go through all of it, but just showing you the difference on something like that. Let's try 1 millimeter fillet, if it'll even calculate. With very sharp corners like that Y, yep, there it is. Sometimes they will not apply. So something like this, ultimately, fillet isn't working for this one. So probably just go back to the emboss and just shrink that a little bit. Edit feature, instead of a 2 millimeter emboss, maybe make it a 1 millimeter. And it won't have to go out nearly as far. It's a minor change, but it keeps doing that. It's a minor change to your project, but doing little things like that can vastly improve the printing speed and also the printability in general. Makes it a little bit stronger, makes it go a little bit faster, makes it work a little bit better. So that's the combination of tools you can use for this, as well as obviously hopping back over to Slicer. Obviously making some changes to the type of supports you're using, should you have to use them, and the spacing on them. Then you get out to, oh, didn't need to export it yet. Obviously, you export it when you're done, but going back over to the sliced view, the preview, and of course you get a rundown. One last thing on that is with these heavily curved forms, currently I have this on draft speed, draft distance. As I zoom in on the bowl, you can see what happens with soft curves. Because this is working layer by layer only on the Z axis, as curves come inward, once they start to get to that peak, it starts to get a little bit choppy. You can adjust that obviously by going to like 0.2 settings. Yes, transfer everything. There's a button if you decide, oh, I want to change the print settings from draft to finer. It'll bring up these options. All those adjustments we made, like the style and type of supports, to spacing, and all that such. You can hit transfer and it'll just change all of those and recalculate everything. It's all right. It disappeared. That happens. It's only because it's recalculating, or it has to be recalculated when you just hit slice again. So you didn't lose anything. That's all. As long as you hit that transfer button. Thinking and thinking and thinking. Because it's finer detail, now it's making that many more layers. So this is going to add to the overall time. Now we're back up to 11 hours. So you see the difference of just going from 0.2 millimeter quality to 0.3 in draft. You really can up the timing. But if you really needed detailing on those curved surfaces, it did add some more levels. So take that how you will. Honestly, with something like this, draft setting is probably just fine. And if you really want to drop it down, print these in 2 parts. Don't print them at the same time. You're going to definitely up your chance of failure should it fail. Very low rate of failure on these, but hey, everybody knows that. Of course, it's going to fail when I do it. So there you go. But that's the rundown of adjusting your project, reorienting your project, and playing with the different support settings to improve printability and that sort. So hopefully it works for you, and ultimately play around with it. Heck, try orienting it, just changing stuff around. With this project, that's not going to be a good solution, but with other ones, it might be. So play with them, see where it gets you.